say, perhaps I'm wrong, I can't imagine, that no one in this room has faced as much adversity as these 4 young men are about to face. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I really don't think that I am. So as we look at the Word this morning, no matter what we're going through, I believe that each one in this room, now and in the future, can look to see what the Word of God says and look at this illustration that God gives us in the life of these men to see what we can do in the face of adversity. Because quitting is not an option in Jesus Christ. In Jesus Christ, there is no such thing as quitting. In Jesus Christ, we are there, we're for the duration. He was there for the duration. And once you are called by God and you have had a life-changing experience in Him, guess what? You can't even give it back. You're His child, and that's what it is. So as we're facing adversity, we're going to look at these things. And we're looking this morning at able to stand up in the face of adversity. So we're looking at first standing up. And we're looking in Daniel chapter 1. I want to read for you verses 5 through 8. Before we dive in, we're looking at 3 different chapters. And I want to explain, so I'm not reading 3 chapters in length. We're going to look at part of chapter 1. We're going to look at part of chapter 2. We're going to look at part of chapter 3. Please go home and read them, because I don't want anybody to think that I'm picking verses out and making it say what I want. It's just so I can get you to Cracker Barrel on time, where we're going to read portions. And I've worked so many times when you start reading the Bible, I don't know what happens, but you begin reading it, about 4 words in, everybody just kind of drifts off. They have no idea what's being read. So that's why we're doing this in small blocks. We're in Daniel chapter 1. We're beginning in verse 5. And the king appointed for them daily provisions of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank, and 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of that time they might be able to serve before the king. Now from among those the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. To them the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael he gave Meshach, and to Azariah he gave Abednego. But David purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. As we're looking at these men, and we're looking especially in this first chapter at Daniel, Daniel was able to stand up. And we're looking at standing up in adversity or no matter what. And this young man was able to make a stand. He purposed in his heart, and keep that in your mind this morning. He purposed in his heart at the very beginning that he was not going to do anything contrary to what the Word of God said. Regardless of the circumstances, Daniel, and I'm guessing his buddies with him because they follow along later, have decided we are not, no matter what happens, we are not going to do these things. There is a decision that is made beforehand. They have, I love the phrase, purposed in his heart. It's one of them things like, you really don't get it. You don't understand. I have decided this is not going to happen. They didn't go with the flow and find the best way to maneuver in order to stay alive. They purposed in their heart that they were going to do it. Now, I want us to get a mental picture of where they're at and how difficult it would be for them to do so. Okay, these men, somewhere between 17 and 23, we're guessing, are taken not only from their land, but guess what the king did when he came in? Most of the people died. There was a remnant that was left, but they were slaughtered. As these young men are coming before the king, it is most likely that their parents are dead, and they will never see them again. They have been taken away from their parents. They have been taken away from their homeland. Everyone that they knew before is no longer there. There is a whole new group of friends, and guess what? They don't even speak the same language. They are completely alone. As they're standing before this king in this training for 3 years, and they're there, they even told them what they were allowed to eat and what they were not allowed to eat. They told them where to sleep. They told them what they were to wear. Everything in their life was now dictated. They took these young men, if you didn't notice in the text, the man that was taking care of them was the chief of who? The eunuchs. So not only did they take their parents, and they took their home, and they took their friends, but they even took their manhood. These are now eunuchs that are standing before the king. And they also took their religion from him, because they are they are training before the king to learn the way of the Chaldeans. And this is why Nebuchadnezzar, a very wise man, evil but wise, picked that age group. Because you're pliable at that age. You can still get someone to do what you want them to do at that age. They're not stuck in their ways. Does that make sense? I mentioned a little bit ago, for this purpose, the basic training thing. If you take a 35 to 55-year-old man, put him on a bus 2 o'clock in the morning and start yelling at him, you're going to get punched in the face. because they are stuck in their ways. But if you get a young person who is still pliable, you can make them think and do what you want them to do. And I'm not anti-American or anti-military by any means, but how else do you think they get men that are willing to? I watched a news special the other night where this young man literally did like in the movies, and a Marine dove on a grenade to save his friends. You have to start young and train, and Nebuchadnezzar has done this. And he's taken them away not only from everything in their life, but also from their place of worship, their God. And we have to remember, this is Jerusalem, this is Israel. When they worshiped, we see later in the book of Daniel, as he is looking at the lion's den, that story of the lion's den, that 3 times a day as he prayed, he turned eastward toward Jerusalem and opened his windows. See, because that's where God dwelt in their mind. The temple is where they went to give sacrifice. The Holy of Holies was there. So in their mind, this is where God was. And it was taken away, and they're in a new place. And here they are. And I can't imagine having the fortitude like these young men. But even in this situation, Daniel knew, and he said in his heart, he purposed in his heart that he would not do it. Daniel took a stand. And see, we could talk about the fourth man in the fire all we want, but we need to talk about how we got to the place where Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the world, saw the Son of God, the fourth man in the fire. And it all started here with the person of God being obedient to God regardless of the circumstances and being able to make a stand. So he stood up regardless of his circumstances, but he also was able to stand up no matter what the world thought about him. Can you imagine what people were thinking? He is in captivity. All of his family has most likely been murdered. These guys weren't playing. And so all this guy says is, here's some, I don't know about you, this would have been the biggest temptation for me. You put a steak and a baked potato in front of me. What's the odds I'm going to ask for pulse to eat? It's just not going to happen. I was really impressed. But can you imagine what the other guys are thinking? Why, shh, keep it down, dude. You're going to get us all killed. Just eat the cotton-picking meat. It's really not a big deal. But Daniel purposed in his heart, and these men, regardless of what everyone thought around them, they were not going to defile themselves because it was number one in life. How did they do it? You think this is just something that popped in their head? That they just said, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to give this a try? No. Do you think they just said, let me explain pulse so you know? Pulse is like a wheat. It wasn't really eaten like some people think it's like loose vegetables. It's a kind of wheat that they take. Basically, it's Wheaties, okay? They take wheat and they dry it up. So it's like the boys said, you can have your steak, give me my Wheaties. If there were cereal boxes back then, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and we'd be promoting them on TV for their cereal. They ate Wheaties. So here they are, and they're doing what they're supposed to do, and they demanded not even to eat meat, but to eat this wheat. And here they stand up regardless of what the world thinks. And I want you to think, why would they do that? What would cause them to be able to do this? And we get it in their names, okay? Their names, we know them as Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel. We know if you're a children's worker or you have small ones, you know them as Rakshak and Benny. If you've done a lot of children's church work and you've got that call in the middle of the night that it was time to children's church, and out comes the Veggie Tales video, yes, then you know it's Rakshak and Benny. But as we look at their original names, Mishael, Hananiah, Azariah, and Daniel. As we look at their names, we could tell a lot about them, because it's not like today where I like the name Bobby. It sounds nice, and you name your child. There were meanings to the names. And I'm going to give you the definitions to their names. God is my judge. That's one. God has favored. That's another one. I don't know which is which because I really don't know Hebrew. Who is what God is? That was a third name. And the fourth name was Jehovah has helped. Now this tells us a great deal. See, because now we see where the foundation has come from for the actions in which they are taking. See, there's something happened. They were trained from a very young age, obviously, by their parents who were godly, even though the rest of the nation was not. They were trained. And there's something that if you're a policeman or if you're in the military, there is something that is constantly being said that in times of danger or times of adversity, there's a phrase that they always use, and it's this: stick to your training. Revert back to your training. When your mind kind of goes scatterbrained, go back to your training and remember what you were trained. We see the Navy SEALs that went in and got Osama bin Laden. I don't know if you've read about any of that information, but they didn't just wake the SEALs up at 4 o'clock in the morning and say, hey boys, let's go get him. They actually built a compound that looked just like the compound they were going to attack. And for weeks upon weeks, drill after drill, they went in and attacked this fake compound. They had plan A, plan B, plan C, all the way down to plan D in case one didn't work. And they practiced each one over and over and over. There came a point in these men's life where they were able to, with their eyes closed practically, know exactly what to do. I bet you if they closed their eyes blindfolded, they had gone through that training so many times, they knew how many steps it was to this door or to that corridor or how to get wherever it was, because every day it was important to them that they needed to know, and they trained. They reverted back to their training. As we look in the life of these young men, they are reverting back to the training that their parents give them. Parents, listen to me. It is so imperative that we train up our child in the way that he needs to go. Because you have no idea the world that is out there today that wasn't out there in your day and in my day. The world of school, the world of the workplace, what they are going to learn is going to boggle your mind. The things they're going to shove down their throat. And I'm telling you, if they are not able to, follow me, revert back to their training, they're going to fall into the lies and into the world. And that is why 90%, no, what's the stat? It's either 98, I don't want to just throw numbers out, it's too convenient. 98 or 93% of all students in Southern Baptist churches, when they leave, when they go to college, they drop out of church. And the stat is very high. Forget the numbers. It's a very high number. I don't want to be a liar. It's in the 90 percentile of students that leave and never come back because they get in the world. And guess what? They had no training to revert back to. And let me, the side sermon this morning, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he'll not depart from it. First of all, that's a proverb. And second of all, that does not mean make sure that Joey goes to church once a week and doesn't use bad language and is polite to the neighbors. That is not what that text is saying. It's amazing to me as I teach Sunday school. I've taught Sunday school in the past in the morning, and I come in and I kind of alluded to it last week, but I got a bunch of students and they're all half asleep and they're looking like they're half dead. I said, what's going on? Well, we had a sleepover last night. We played video games till 3 o'clock in the morning. Then we rolled some houses with toilet paper. We had a really good time. Mom and Dad didn't think anything of it. But Monday morning, when it's time for English class and lit or whatever it may be, or even gym class, and they're worried about their grades because then it hits the pocketbook because that affects the college that they're going to go to, so they need this grade. On Sunday night, guess what? They're in bed at 9 o'clock, their dinner is eaten, and they're ready for the morning. Their clothes are laid out because, listen what the student's thinking. He is seeing what's important in life. Are you following me? If there's no training to revert back to, they're going to fall. That's why so many of them have, and I need to stop beating this dead horse, but the parent instilled godly values in their life. And because of those godly values, they were able to make a stand regardless of what the world thought. We have two choices. Do we go with the flow when we get in the world, or do we make a stand? We can go with the flow or make a stand. But here's where it begins. They had a plan. He purposed in his heart. He wasn't going with the flow. He made a plan before he went into it in order that he might not do what everyone else was doing. And he succeeded with his friends. And you know what? Young people especially. Notice that Daniel was the one that purposed in his heart, but 4 of them didn't fall. You're a leader among your peers. And when you do what's right, other people will follow you. If you do what's wrong, they'll follow you there too also. They were able to stand up. Not only were they able to stand up, but they were also able to stand firm. Turn with me, if you will, to Daniel chapter 2. I'm going to read for you verses 12 through 18 in Daniel chapter 2. And I need to preface this too. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream here, Daniel chapter 2, after they've taken in captivity. And he has this dream, and he sees this great thing, and this great big, it's an image. It's 10 stories tall. It's 10 foot wide at the base. It's got a head of gold. It's got a chest and arms are silver, and then the middle part is brass, and then it's got legs that are iron, and the feet and the toes are iron mixed with clay, and he has this vision that scares him to death. And so Nebuchadnezzar, he calls all the wise men, which, by the way, our boys are now considered wise men in Babylon. They've been through the 3 years training, and he calls them all together and said, I had a dream, and I need you to interpret it. And so they say, okay, king, not a problem. You tell us your dream, and we're going to tell you the interpretation of it. And he says, well, no. This is what's going to happen. you're going to tell me what I dreamed, and then you're going to tell me the interpretation. The wise men begin to freak out and say, look, it's impossible. No king has ever asked that of anyone. And he said, I know you're going to take advantage of me. If you are truly a soothsayer, you will tell me the dream and the interpretation. And when they cannot do it, he sends out a decree that all of the wise men of Babylon are to be slaughtered that day. So Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel are part of that group, although they're not there in the forefront as he's talking to the wise men, and they catch word of it. That brings us up to speed with where we are in chapter 2. So chapter 2, verse 12, it says this, For this reason the king was very angry and furious, and he gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. And with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, Why is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time that he might tell the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made a decision known to Hannah, Mishael, Azariah, his companions, that they might seek the mercies from God of heaven concerning this secret, so that Daniel's companions may not perish with the rest of the wise men in Babylon. As we're reading these passages, Daniel was not only able to stand up, but he was also able to stand firm in what he was believing. And the reason he was able to stand firm is because of this word, sovereign. God is sovereign. And that's one of those churchy words, but listen, if you take the S off, what you have? You have overreign. There is a God who overreigns over everything. And as we look at these verses, we kind of have to get an idea of the language that's happening here and the kind of twist. Normally, someone from Israel, when they're talking about their God, they call him the God of Israel. They call him the God of Jerusalem. Or he might be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So as these men are in the bind that they're in, all of a sudden we see this wording. He says, the mercies of the God of heaven. As they're praying, they have taken God out of his box, out of Jerusalem, and they have made known that he is the God of the universe. He is in complete control of everything. There is a sovereign God who can handle this situation. So when it was time for them to not only stand up, but it was time for them to stand firm, they were able to stand firm because they weren't standing on their own abilities. They were standing on the sovereign God. And listen, when you are obedient to what God would have you to do, that's when you're able to fully trust in him. When we get outside of his obedience, that's when we can't trust him so much. That's when the comfort zone is kind of shot. But they know and they knew what they were doing, and they knew that they could stand firm in what God had told them to do because they had been obedient, and they're praying to the mercies of heaven. God did not stay in the box. There was not a temple mentality that they would go to Jerusalem and there they would have to worship God. They're praying to the God of heaven to be relieved of this punishment, and the revelation of this dream might come true, and they're confident that God's will is going to happen regardless. We got to get out of it. I talked about it last week, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but we can't keep God in Bluffton Baptist Church. He can't live in the four walls. He can't survive only one day a week for a couple hours. He is alive. He's active. He is the Lord of everything in life, not just some things. Daniel has purposed in his heart, not on a worship day, but for his life, that he was going to do what needed to be done in the face of adversity. That's where we need to be. We need to act and dress and speak the same way we do here as we do everywhere else. We need to stand firm in God's will in every aspect in our life. I want you to remember the story of Joseph. How could Joseph have known? As he's thrown in prison, his brothers have sold him into slavery. He's worried about being put to death. How in the world could God have any part of that? There is no way that he could have known. But he trusted in the mercies of the God of heaven as these boys. And through that time, because of the life of Joseph, we're not going to spend a lot of time here, because of what he did and because of his attitudes, the line of the Messiah was preserved once again, that Jesus Christ could be born for our sin, to take away our sin, I should say. He didn't know. There is no way to know the end result. He didn't know what God was doing, but regardless, he was able to stand firm. And last but not least, we're going to look at they stood out. In order to make a stand, you have to stand out. We're going to look here in chapter 3 in just a moment, and we're going to look at this statue that Nebuchadnezzar had put up. So now in chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar has a statue. He's built it. It's 90 feet tall. It's 9 foot wide. I said that about the dream. I was mistaken. We don't have any idea how big it was in his dream. But Nebuchadnezzar has built this. And he built this statue, and he used all gold. And I just want to get you an idea of perhaps what the king is thinking. In this dream that he had had, the statue had a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, brass, and then it went on. And when the dream was interpreted by Daniel, it said that you, O king, are a king of kings, and you are the head of gold. This is the first world empire. Nebuchadnezzar is ruling the known world. And he says, and then after you, another will come. And then after you, another will come. So the different materials used in this dream were different kingdoms that would come. So here's Nebuchadnezzar. He builds up an image. It's 90 feet tall and 9 foot wide. And I don't know this, but I would guess you that if you got a ladder and you were to climb up 90 feet to the top of that statue and you were to get centered with it and look it right in the face, I'd give you 10 to 1 odds. It looked just like Nebuchadnezzar, wouldn't you think? The whole statue is now gold. There are no separate kingdoms. And Nebuchadnezzar has claimed that his kingdom will last forever. God's had about enough. God has given the world into his hands, and the world wasn't enough. He's about to be humbled. So here he is. He makes this statue, and he says, at the time you hear the sound of the cornet, the harp, the flute, the sackbut, the dulcimer, and all kind of music, you should bow down and worship the golden image that I have set up. If you do not, in that same self-hour, you will be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. And this is where our story is. We're in Daniel chapter 3. And I'm going to read for you verses 1 through 12. How fast is this, Missy? You haven't given me the slowdown sign. We doing okay? There's a lot to cover. Okay. Chapter 3, read 12 verses here. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits, and its width was 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word and gathered together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officers of the province to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you is commanded, O peoples, nations, languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the flute, the harp, the lyre, and the psaltery, and the symphony with all kinds of music, you should fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." So at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, and the lyre, and the symphony, with all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said, "King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, and the psaltery, the symphony, with all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship it shall be cast in the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods nor worship the golden image which you have set up." And I want you to imagine the scene that is set up. It's in the plain of Dura, which means there is nothing behind it. When this statue is there, it's not covered with all kind of idols or different things or houses. It is set by itself. From the time that the sun rose in the morning till the time that it set in the evening, there was nothing blocking it. And there would be a bright, beautiful glare coming off the head of that statue. It wasn't like you could ignore it. It wasn't like you could overlook it. It was a big deal. And I would imagine 10 stories tall, it would be quite intimidating. And here are the men. They're getting called. Now, they're one of the satraps, the administrators, the governors. They're getting called to this image. And now it is time to stand up as we're looking. No one else would stand up. And the music goes off. And now it's time for them to bow. And as you look across the scene, now imagine we're in the plain of Dura. There is nothing. 90-foot statue. As you're looking from left to right, or you're looking across, all you see are backs, butts, and elbows all across the landscape. That's it. And then you come across to the side, and over here, there's 3 guys standing up. 3 guys that have not bowed. 3 guys followed me that purposed in their heart that they would not defile the living God, and there they are. How hard would it be for them to blend in at a time like this? They stuck out like sore thumbs. It was an obvious thing. My friends, when we decide, when we purpose in our heart that we're going to be able to stand up and that we're going to be able to stand out, stand firm. We will stand out. It is impossible for us as born-again believers to be in His will and not stand out. If we blend in where we're at, I have news. You're either A, not saved, or B, completely out of the will of God if you are not making a stand. If you do not stand out where you're at and you're blending in with all the other people. I quote Romans chapter 12, verse 1 all the time, but let me go to verse 2. Verse 1 says this, "I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God." But watch this in verse 2. "But be ye not conformed to this world, But instead, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you're able to prove the good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. These young men would not conform to the ways of the world. They didn't partially conform. They didn't make a little step toward. They didn't try to fit in a little bit. And here's the mentality we have. The world is here. And so we just make sure that the world is here. We make sure that we're one step higher than the world. That way we can feel moral. And that there's a difference in morality and righteousness. I'm going to tell you, morality floats with society. So as long as we're one step above the world, we're all right. So when the world moves from here and drops down a step, this is what the church does. Like, sweet. And they drop down a step. Now we're a step above the world. Now we're where they were a few years ago, but as long as we're just a little bit better than them. And then when they take another step down, our floating morality goes down too. And we are supposed to stand in such a way that we never are moved from the top. We never follow that way of degradation. We don't follow the steps of the world. I want you to imagine these boys as they were there and they stood up and they stood out. What if they just kind of bent? What if they just kind of bowed down? Let's say everybody else is like this. All right, the Muslim look here. And you know, what if they just kind of did this here? You know, because that way they wouldn't be, completely bent over. But at the same time, you don't want to raise any feathers. You know, you don't want to ruffle anything. You don't want to get anybody going. Or you don't want to be a problem. You don't want to be in the way. You don't want to look stupid or stand out in the crowd. So you're going to make your stand by we're just going to bow down a little bit. Or maybe perhaps they were really committed and they could just get down on their knees. That way they're probably about even, but their heads are a little bit higher. No one will really see. But you know what? In my heart, I really don't believe this. In my heart, I have nothing to do with this. But I'm just here, because this is what they said to do. I'm going to do. No! In order to make a stand, you have got to stand out. If you don't stand out, you have bowed down. There is no middle ground. It's either bowing down or standing up. And what are we doing? These young men purposed in their heart that they would make a stand regardless of what happened in their life. And they stood out. Stand out when no one else will. It doesn't matter. You notice how many there were? It wasn't like, man, only 14% of the crowd. 3 out of thousands. 3. It's a very small percentage of people who are willing to really stand out. I think of teenagers. How many really, even little things, like when it's time to go into the rated R movie, say, you know what, not cool. How many in the crowd of all those people say, you know what, I'm just not going to do that. How many of us in the workplace, when it's not a big deal, it's just 15 minutes on the time card for break, everybody does it, it's just not a big deal. We're either standing up or we're bowing down. We're either standing out or we're blending in. There is no middle ground in Christianity. Yes or no, go or no go. And they were able to stand out, and we need to stand out as Jesus commanded. In Matthew chapter 5, it says, you are the light of the world. A city that is on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor does a man light a lamp and put it under a basket, but instead he puts it on a stand so that all who are in the house will have light. We are to be the light of the world. We are to be the salt of the world. Our problem is that church mentality I talked about is we're the light when we're together. But when we go out into the world, we're no longer the light. Because God lives here, and this is where we worship Him. And then we go back out in the world. I used this before, but it's like having a solar-powered battery or a solar-powered flashlight. It doesn't make any sense because you don't need a flashlight in the daytime because you have light. Why in the world would you make that? This is what we do. We take our light, we bring it here, we get into the darkness, and we shut it off. We are commanded to be lights. We are commanded to stand out. We are commanded, hear me, to be fools for Christ. I've been a fool my whole life. But you know what? Later in life, when I was obedient, I love being a fool for Him because it makes it all better. Be a fool for Christ. Be the one that stands out. Make the difference. And here's where it's going to end up. See, because Nebuchadnezzar would have never come to know the Son of God. There's no way these 4 boys could say, this is what we're going to do. Here's my plan. All right, I read Evangelism Explosion at Lifeway. And so what we're going to do is we're going to read the Romans Road to Nebuchadnezzar. So we're going to get him alone. We're going to tell him the man has a problem and God has a solution and that this is what they didn't do that. That would have been impossible. They didn't say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to put together a worship service like he has never seen. There's going to be guitars and there's going to be all kind of cool stuff. He's going to get all emotional and we're going to get just to that point. We're like, bow, we're going to baptize him. No. They had no idea They had no idea anything was going to be done. All they did, follow me, is be obedient regardless of their situation. And in the end, what happens? Nebuchadnezzar comes to the edge of that fire. He says, did we not throw 3 men bound in the fire? But lo, behold, I see 4 men, and the 4th looks like the Son of God. Without these young men being obedient in the face of adversity, you never would have known. Because they had a time in their life when they purposed in their heart, I am not going to do these things and defile the living God. Because of that, the leader of the known world saw the Son of God before he was even born in the flesh in this world, face to face in person, and repents. There's no way they could have done it. The only thing they could do is be obedient. Stand up, stand firm, and stand out. This morning in your life, are you there? Can you look at your life and say, there is a difference? I stand out from the people that are around me. Not in an arrogant way, but I am different. I don't act like that. I don't do those things. People, you know, it's either Jesus freak or Jesus fraud. Do people look at you like you're weird? Because let me tell you, if you have Jesus Christ, you're weird. You're supposed to be weird. You're supposed to be different. Your family's not really supposed to like you too much because they're going to start looking at you like, why don't you do the things that you used to do? Because you're glorifying God. Are you there? 3 in all of those thousands. There aren't a lot. There aren't a lot. There is a wide road we talked about a couple months ago, and a narrow road. There is a wide path, and there is a narrow gate, and there are few that find it. Are you there? Are you able to lead those who are around you to Jesus Christ by standing up, standing firm, standing out? I'm going to ask you to pray with me as Ms. Kim comes. She's going to lead us in a time of invitation. But as you are standing, I'm going to ask you to stand with me as we pray. As you're standing, I want you to think about your life. No one else is yours. Where are we at? Are we half bowed? Are we kind of bowed? Are we all the way down? Are we standing up? Are we doing what God wants us to do? And this morning, here's the invitation for you. If you have not already done it, would you today, as these young men did, purpose in your heart that you are going to do the best of in your ability to follow what Jesus Christ has for you to do, that those around you might come to know Him? Will you do it?